All right, folks, we're gonna begin here, and to close out the day, we're shifting into a panel conversation with 3 local farmers and ranchers who are very strong advocates for agriculture and passionate about sharing their stories. So whether it's through direct marketing or sharing on-farm experiences or adding value to crops that you are growing, each of them is finding a way to connect with consumers and bring that farm-to-table story to life. So today's panel is going to be moderated by Bryce McKenzie, AdFarm's Director of Strategy. Bryce, I'm going to hand it over to you to lead the discussion, but please join me in giving a warm welcome to our panel.
Thank you, Brady, and thank to the 3 of you for joining us this afternoon. I often say one of my favorite parts of working in the agriculture industry is the people in it, so this is a thrill for me for having an opportunity to have this conversation. So we're joined by, on the end, Charlotte today, Matt, and Emma. I'm actually going to pass it off to each of you, if you wouldn't mind giving a more thorough introduction of yourself and your operation, and just, a little bit about yourself. So Emma, maybe I'll get started with you to kick us off.
Sure, thanks, Bryce. So I'm Emma Cross. I own and operate Sundance Herefords near Tofield, Alberta. We raise purebred Hereford cattle, and we sell 2-year-old bulls off the farm and at consignment sales every spring and fall. Off the farm, I keep myself busy as the social media coordinator for the Public and Stakeholder Engagement Program, which is jointly delivered by the Canadian Cattle Association and Canada Beef. The goal of that program is to build and maintain public trust in the Canadian beef industry, which is really where I do most of my connecting with consumers. And then I'm also the Director of Communications for the Canadian Hereford Association and volunteer on the Calgary Stampede Cattle Trail Committee. So lots of different avenues with communicating with consumers.
Thanks, Emma. Matt, go ahead.
Matt Hamill with Red Shed Malting. So I'm a recovering banker. I did 10 years at ATB and 10 years at RBC. And then for the last 10 years been with Red Shed Malting, which is our family business. It's a craft malt house set up on the family farm. We take grains from the farm, barley, wheat, oats, rye, and process them and sell that to brewers and distillers, mostly in Alberta.
Charlotte, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Charlotte Wasylik, and I, along with my family, own and operate Chatsworth Farm, which is 2 hours east of Edmonton near Vermilion. And we started out pretty much like any farm did. We're predominantly a beef operation with about 250 head of mother cows, and we've got some purebred Black Angus and Simmental in there, which my brothers look after. And we also have some sheep, some poultry, pigs, and we've got our livestock guardian dogs as well, plus the horses that I enjoy. And in addition to just the day-to-day farming, I also have a farm-to-table operation, which I manage, doing all of the communication with our butchers, figuring out all of the sales strategies, and communicating with customers. And off the farm, I really have a passion for agricultural events. So some of the ones that I've been fortunate enough to have worked on include Farm Fair International, working with Canadian Western Agribition. I just did Ponoka Stampede for a little stint, and those are some of my absolute favorite things, and that ties into the work that I do with incorporating Alberta Open Farm Days into our farm education as well as virtual farm tours.
Thank you. Thank you all 3 for those introductions. Continuing with today's theme on consumer connection, I know as a producer you don't necessarily need to speak to consumers. I actually personally know a lot of producers that actively avoid having conversations with consumers. So you obviously, all 3 of you, have a different approach and want to tell your farm story, or if it's your off-farm job, it's really important communicating agriculture story to consumers. So I guess my question to kick us off is why it's important to you. So Emma, maybe we'll start with you again.
Sure, yeah. So, of course, I am, employed to connect with consumers. There's that. But as a producer, I breed seed stock. So my customer is not necessarily the end consumer of beef. That being said, if there's no demand for beef, there's no demand for feeder calves, and there's no demand for the seed stock that I breed. So really, to me, connecting with consumers is a necessity for anybody, anywhere along the line in the beef industry, to have a chance and a product to market. It's about social license to operate, and making sure that we have the support and demand for our beef industry. 10 years ago, my off-farm job with the Public and Stakeholder Engagement Program didn't exist. And really it's because people started becoming more interested in asking questions about food. Back in the day, a lot more people lived on farms or were more directly connected to farms, and so they didn't need to ask those questions so much. They had a neighbor or a family member that could answer it for them. But now we do need to answer those questions. And so it's important that we do that to maintain that demand for agricultural commodities across the board.
Thanks. Matt?
Yeah, Emma, you nailed it. So we're also not like directly to the end consumer. So we're selling to brewers and distillers, and they're dealing with the consumer. But it's up to everyone in that value chain to kind of help tell the story of agriculture. And so that's kind of the way we see our role, creating demand for the end products, but also helping our customers tell their story. So brewers want to talk about the local ingredients that they're using, and distillers really like to talk about the family history, the almost 100-year farm history, because they're selling some whiskeys that are maybe 3 and 5 years old, competing against whiskeys that are 10, 15, 20 years old.
Charlotte?
I'm going to echo everything that Emma has said because that's so important. And some of the things that I've heard even include, I don't raise beef, I raise cattle. And that is so misguided, and we really have to change that. And many of us don't think of that. We think that we raise beef and that's our end goal. And so giving people the opportunity to ask those questions and then answer them back is so powerful. And that's one of the reasons why I think farm to table has become so hugely popular, is because we have the opportunity to connect with those customers. And even if they aren't direct customers of ours, they might be in a different province, a different country, halfway across the world, they're still interested and they still want to know, and that benefits those farmers within that area. And it's just a lot of fun because we're doing things that not a lot of people get to experience. I don't know how many calves I've seen born. I don't know how many lambs I've seen born, and for some people they'll never get to see it in person in real life, except for maybe seeing it online, and that gives them a connection to the farm, connects them to being interested and excited to eat meat, and that for me is very special and important to do.
Well, that's great. And I know in our world, we're often kind of data nerds and looking at surveys and research. And anytime we do hear from consumers, their number one most trusted person in terms of source of information is farmers and producers themselves. So we truly appreciate you guys sharing your voice and telling the story. They don't often ask about marketing professionals, but I think we rank about as low as politicians sometimes when they're asking if agriculture story from us. So that leads me to my next question, and you kind of talked about it, Charlotte, in terms of those questions you get asked. What are some of the most frequent questions you do hear from consumers about your operation or just agriculture in general? Emma?
Yeah, I think for me, it's less maybe a single question and more a type of question. And it's one that surprises most people when they first start talking to consumers. And it's questions that we take for granted, like how much does that cow weigh? What does a cow eat? What is a heifer? You know, things that we think are obvious, that we take for granted, that we know and don't have to explain, but they're things that people don't necessarily get the chance to learn and know anymore, like I said, because, you know, we don't have so much of the population that's directly connected to a farm anymore. And so really, when I learned that those were the kind of questions that people were asking, it was humbling for me, because it's that thought of, you know, this isn't what people are spending their day thinking about. I spend all day thinking about breeding cattle and beef quality and the science and the technology and the innovation that goes into that. But what the end consumer is thinking about is, do I trust my food? Does it taste good? Is it safe? And so those are the questions that they're asking. They're things that are a lot more basic than what we're expecting.
Matt, how about on your side? I know you aren't as directly connected with the consumer, but I'm sure you get opportunities often to talk to people that maybe don't know as much about agriculture or the work that you do.
Yeah, so we're a malt house, and I'm a maltster, and somehow the question that I always get is, so you guys make hops? It's like, no, we grow barley. This is the best place in the world to grow barley. So we're working with that. And so it is like extremely basic questions is kind of what we're hearing a lot. Thankfully, it's a little bit puzzling, but people really trust beer. And it's a great way to start a conversation too. So if we can teach people some of the basics about agriculture by having a beer and by talking about that beer, we're more than happy to go on that journey with customers for their first, look into agriculture.
Awesome. And Charlotte, how about for you? I know you host a ton of consumers at your farm, at your Open Farm Days event every year, so you probably get all kinds of questions thrown your way. What are some of the most common ones you hear?
It can depend on the group that I'm touring, because a lot of times I do a lot of school groups, but some of those school groups can have really thoughtful and really insightful questions, and the students aren't really scared of asking those, like, what are those big round things at the back of that pig? Well, those are the testicles. And so maybe with some of the adults, they have those questions, but they're a little bit scared to ask. So I try and gather up and keep a memory bank of all of those common ones. People are really fascinated by the ear tags. So I talk about dangle tags, and I also talk about the CSIP tags for sheep or CCIA tags for cattle, talk about those specific ones that are legislated, and then the ones that farmers get to pick and choose however they want to do their colors. So those are some common ones. And also about vaccines. That's a big one, especially right now. So going through and even doing videos and telling people about why we vaccinate, how we vaccinate, and also pieces about dry aging, or some questions that I'm having a little bit more right now is low or no histamines in meat. So people asking, do you have beef that is available with pretty much fresh as soon as it's been slaughtered? So those have been some of the newer questions that I've just been getting in the last couple months or so.
I'm going to stick with you, Charlotte, and ask you a couple questions too. One, in that same theme, when it comes to answering some of those questions about agriculture that can be a little bit complex, maybe you're not going to be able to explain it in just a conversation. Is there resources or somewhere else you send people to help answer those complex questions, or if people just generally want to know more about agriculture, what direction do you point them in?
Usually those questions I can answer, and I can usually tie it up in a pretty nice little package most times, because they are those simple questions. And I always like to tie it back to either something human or something cats or dogs, because we always understand cats or dogs. And so when we're talking about maybe a group of steers or a group of wethers, and they'll say, well, why do you castrate them? And then I'll say, well, who has a dog? And I'll get everybody to raise their hands, and then I'll say, who has a male dog? And they'll raise their hands. And then who has a cat, or who has a neutered male dog? And then most people raise their hands. And then I kind of put it back on them and say, with little kids, it's a lot harder because they don't really know why, but they'll know that they have a male dog and it probably can't have babies. And so then I always tie it back into that. And from that point, it's a lot easier for people to understand that it reduces aggression. You don't have to worry about unplanned pregnancies. So really tying it back to that helps with a lot of those questions. And then something like maybe C-sections. Well, if people can get C-sections, livestock can also. So I always try and tie it back into something that's really familiar and that people are very understanding of, and that really helps.
Staying with you, Charlotte. Another thing that our industry faces is attracting that next generation of young people to it. And that doesn't necessarily mean be young people that are growing up on farms and keeping them on farms, but people that grow up off farm and want to come to agriculture. So last year, you won the Rising Star Award at the Women in Ag Awards, and this goes to young leaders who show exceptional promise and advocates for agriculture. I guess tell us what that award meant to you, and what advice would you have for the agriculture industry to attract more leaders like you?
It was very exciting to be awarded that, and it was very special because it was a close friend of mine who nominated me for it, and it was a fantastic opportunity to be. We were in Calgary for it, put on by AFSC, and just getting to be in a room filled with incredible women. It was a women in ag event, so that was just so special. But I think I'm a huge advocate of 4-H. I was in 4-H when I was 9 years old. I'm old enough to have been a member before Cleaver kids were a member. So if that was a thing when I started, I probably would have started a lot earlier. But 4-H is just such a huge component, and a lot of people don't realize that you can be in 4-H without having a specific beef or a dairy or a sheep project, and that in turn will get you into probably some form of agriculture, because of course that's what 4-H is really good at. But you look at things like Calgary Stampede and all of their youth programs, and you look at the Canadian Western Agribition. They had their second annual Spring Fling, which is their youth cattle show this year, and I think it was full, or just much bigger participation than it was last year. So there is a huge interest and opportunities within agriculture for anyone who's young, and we can thank all of the organizations who are just so happy and excited to support all of those youth. And also when we look at, I think, social media, there's so many wonderful, I don't want to say influencers, but farmers who are out there who are doing really great work. And especially when you look at the side of whether it's a farm to table program or just ag in general, it's a lot of women, and they're doing a wonderful job. And I think that really gives young women or young men the opportunity to see that they can do it. And there's so many facets of agriculture. So you can just dive in somewhere and fit into a role. Like when I was doing agricultural events, I had no idea. I don't know, when I was 14, I don't know who I thought put on the Calgary Stampede. It happened, but there is a world in agriculture, but outside of primary production, that you can be involved, and you can live in the city and do it and still feel connected. And that, I think, more people have to be aware of, because there's so many opportunities.
Well, and Ryan touched on it in his presentation as well, and I think just the technology and things like that that are coming to agriculture, and that's something that, you know, who doesn't want to work with cool robots and cool cameras and things like that. And we still don't do a great job of telling that story too, of just how that's expanding, just all the different opportunities that exist within agriculture. I'm a good example of that as well. I grew up on a family farm. No idea that I could have a career in agriculture marketing when I grew up. So it is about just kind of telling those stories and getting them out there, and showing those opportunities that people could have. Matt, I'm going to jump over to you and ask you a couple questions specific to your business. So Red Shed Malting story and Hamill Farms, you know, going on your website, you can see those stories are very interconnected about how those two go together. Why was that important to you to tie in the farm with Red Shed's malting story as much as possible when you started that business?
Well, I think it's important to tie the stories together, but I think just in reality, those stories are connected together too, right? We are set up directly on the family farm. The family farm is mom and dad, and they had 3 kids, and all of us kind of moved off the farm. We had careers outside of the farm, but it was malting that kind of got Joe and I interested in the farm again. So it brought us back to the farm. And so it's just always been very intertwined that way. And some of the biggest advantages that we have with Red Shed come from the fact that we are tied to the farm. So we can grow the varieties that we want. We can control the growing practices that are on there. We can store multiple years of high quality grain to get us through years where there's drought conditions or whatever. And so we can always give our customers top quality product. So yeah, it's the story's intertwined because in life it's intertwined.
And we heard a story from the guys at Gemstone earlier too about looking at your farm operation or your ranch operation and finding a way to add value and do different things. And it's obviously something similar you've done on your operation. So what's some advice that you would pass on to other producers that are looking at their farm operation and want to explore other ways of adding value?
Yeah, so I almost got to put on my banker hat again. And having a business plan is really important. And don't think that because you wrote a business plan, that's the way it's gonna work out. It's absolutely not gonna work out that way. But if you have the business plan written down and you understand your numbers, you're gonna be able to adapt quicker when the changes and challenges come. You'll know, okay, how is that gonna impact the overall profitability, and what are my options to pivot from here?
Last one for you, Matt. Since starting Red Shed, what have you learned about building a brand and trying to reach customers and standing out in a competitive market?
So it's plenty of lessons along the way for sure. I think one of the more pivotal ones for our business was what we thought was going to be important to our customers ended up being a little bit different. So when we first started, we really tried to promote the business on local, sustainable, traceable as being the attributes that we thought mattered to the brewers and distillers and to the end consumer. But when we went and did a poll of our customers a few years in, it ended up that quality and consistency were what our consumers most wanted to hear and most wanted us to talk about. And so we had to pivot and give the customers what they wanted and start telling that as part of our story more.
Yeah. Well, good on you, and that's, I know, part of why this event exists for some reasons, because we talk a lot about reaching farmers or reaching consumers, and as opposed to just guessing on the way to do it, go out and ask them. So that's great that you guys took that step to do it. I'm going to go back to some group questions here. So Emma, maybe we'll get started with you. What advice would you give to other producers that want to connect with consumers or share their farm story or get their voice out there more?
Yeah, I think I'd go back to a piece of consistent research that we heard earlier today, and that is to remember that farmers and ranchers, time and time again, are the most trusted source of information about our food. So sometimes I see producers that are maybe interested in getting involved in advocating for agriculture, feeling nervous and thinking that they're gonna get into arguments, that they need to be defensive, and it's really quite the opposite. Consumers want to support us. They want to rally behind us. I think a great example of that, a couple years ago, Health Canada wanted to put a saturated fat warning label on beef. The Canadian Cattle Association did a campaign that got over 10,000 people sending letters to their elected officials to say, hey, don't do this. And that decision was reversed. So consumers really do support what we're doing. And I think that the number one piece of advice I would have is to remember that. So don't go in with that mentality of defensive or needing to stand up for our industry. It's really about connecting and having conversations. And when you go in with that approach, it totally changes the game.
Matt?
Yeah, we heard it from the keynotes earlier as well. I think it's authenticity. So it's you have people contacting you, even though it says grass-fed beef, and they still want you to hear from your mouth it's grass-fed. And you talked about like the videos that you're making, and you could do some big crazy things, but just keep it authentic, right? And that's important for some of the younger generations. That's something that they keep telling is an important thing that's influencing the way they're buying. And it's just kind of the easiest way too. Like we got nothing to hide. We're happy to tell our story, and we're happy to help our customers, brewers and distillers, tell their story too.
Charlotte?
What I would say to someone who's thinking about starting out in that space of sharing your story is give yourself grace, because it takes time, and for a lot of us, being on the opposite end of that screen can be really intimidating. So give yourself grace and don't put too many expectations on yourself. And it goes to show that what I post now, I would have never dared to have posted when we first started in 2020, but we've built up a following of really supportive, again, really excited people who are really interested in learning about farming and agriculture, and they're just craving anything. They are excited to see some of those things like a C-section, or some of the most connective moments that I have and it's a tough thing, but it's when bad things happen, when an animal dies or when an animal injures themselves, because those are the moments that people assume or kind of think the worst. But then when you get to show them what actually happens, that you take your cow to the vet clinic, she has the C-section. For a lot of people, they think that there's an issue, the farmer doesn't really care all that much, and there goes that cow. But in reality, we care deeply, and we're going to do as much as we can to make sure that we have good outcomes for the cow and calf. So they just love to see those things, and just, we're all very busy. Posting on social media is really not our first priority. But if you can start out slowly and build a following, or just build a group of people who are really supportive and you feel comfortable with them, that's going to give you the best chance to just keep growing and get better at it. It's practice makes better, and it's a lot of fun once you get into it, and also just realizing that you can be yourself and you don't have to care all that much what other people might think of you if you're out there in your dirty farm shirt and just doing chores. But that's what people are really excited to see, because they have no conception of what farming is like. So you really get to share the raw and real and the authentic piece, and that's very important.
Thanks, Charlotte. And all three of you kind of touched on it in one way or another, that, you know, it can be challenging too, just as a single farm or a single producer, to get that story out there, and might feel like you're alone a little bit. But we're lucky today, we have a lot of people that are involved in the agribusiness community, and they might have more ears and more dollars to be able to help tell agriculture stories. So for those individuals, or just the agribusiness community at large, what advice would you have for them to help get agriculture story out there? Charlotte, maybe we'll fire right back to you.
Well, I'll do a little plug. So for our open farm days this year, this will be our 6th year. I want to say thank you to Ad Farm for being a sponsor.
I wasn't going to say anything.
Yes. Yeah. So those are the type of things that are really going to help, because as Alberta Open Farm Days, it's a provincial initiative. Farms don't get any money to be able to host. And within our county alone, I took a look at the map. Within our county alone, there is one other. It's an agri-food, so our local cheesery, but they're not a farm. They get their milk from another farm in the neighboring county. So we're the only farm in our county, which is a pretty large county, the county of Vermilion River. And then there are 5 other surrounding counties. No farm is participating. And one, we do it because events are my bread and butter. I absolutely love them. It's a fun challenge, but they take a lot of work, and they take a lot of dollars to also be able to have something of the type of caliber that I'm looking for. I'm looking for kind of the Calgary Stampede, but just a slightly smaller scale, but that's what I'm aiming for. And to be able to do that, it takes dollars. So thanking all of those sponsors. I don't know if anyone from Alberta Grains is in the audience. They're one of our sponsors, Ad Farm. So it makes a huge difference, and it allows us to make those connections with customers, and it doesn't matter, or customers and just Albertans. And it doesn't matter if they are from the city and they've never touched a horse before, or they're our neighbors down the road, because we get both. And everyone absolutely loves it, and it's so important. So those are some of the things that really make a very meaningful difference.
Matt?
So the question was kind of like how to help get the word out?
Yeah, how can, you got a lot of partners and things like that you work with. How can, other people in the agribusiness community help tell agriculture story?
Yeah, I'd say ask for help. If it's not your strong point, ask for help and use the resources that are out there. So you mentioned Alberta Grains and Ad Farm that have helped you. Alberta Grains has supported some of the events that we've put on. We had a Distillers Day last year, and running that alone just wouldn't have been possible. But if you ask for help, then people will step up.
Emma?
Yeah, I'd definitely echo a lot of what Charlotte said there. We as farmers can only reach so many people, and so there is a certain amount of, pay to play there. And when we have support with dollars and we're able to reach those bigger audiences with events like Open Farm Days or with things like the Calgary Stampede and Cattle Trail, the reality is that those things do take spending to make happen, but that's how we reach larger numbers of people, because we don't all have a neighbor that is a farmer that we can talk to. And then the other piece I would say is just amplifying those producers that are out there, and sharing in a manner that can be amplified, like on social media, digital content, or print media. If there's any way that those can be amplified and spread to more producers, again, it's about just spreading that message further than the audiences that we as producers can reach alone.
We had a mini Calgary Stampede Agri-Food Committee meeting right before this, so yeah, thank you to everybody that volunteers their time to those committees. I do think it makes a big impact, and it's an awesome opportunity, those 10 days, to have some conversations with some consumers. In that theme, and Emma, sticking with you on this one, so last year at the Calgary Stampede, you won first place in the senior division at the Youth Agriculture Speaking Championship. Can you share with our audience a little bit about your topic?
Yeah, so as part of that competition, we had the choice of 5 topics. The one that I chose out of the list talked about how we bridge the knowledge gap between urban and rural. And I kind of chose to flip the script on that topic, and really kind of go after the thought of educating and making sure that consumers know everything there is to know about agriculture. As I mentioned before, consumers aren't spending all their time thinking about the things that we think about every day on the farm. The intricacies, the science, the technology, the innovation. Some of them want to know more, but not everybody needs to be an expert in agriculture. I like to talk about my brother when I talk about this. He is an aerospace engineer. I think what he does is very cool, but a lot of it I don't understand. And at the end of the day, I just want to know the plane's not going to crash. And, the same goes for food. Consumers just want to know their food is safe, that it tastes good, and that they can trust that, the animals have been taken care of well. So with this topic, I chose to kind of flip that and say, it's not about making sure that consumers have as much information as possible. It's about making sure that they have relationships so that they can feel that they can trust the food that they're eating.
And what led you to that kind of insight or thought when you were thinking about putting that presentation together of kind of moving beyond connections and building relationships with consumers? Is that just kind of through your own history and your opportunities and conversations you've had with consumers?
Yeah, definitely was influenced by conversations I've had at Calgary Stampede, and with other producers. You heard earlier today from Barry that they have their phone number on their website. In an ideal world, we could all pick up the phone and ask a farmer a question when we have one. We're not always going to have questions about the intricacies and the details from consumers, but when they do have a question about something specific, it's probably because they've seen something negative and they're unsure. And so we need to make sure that they have that resource there to ask those questions and to get that information when they do want it. And so, of course, we don't all have a phone number that we can pick up and call. We don't all have that neighbor, but that's where we can use channels like social media, like other digital content, like social media influencers even, to reach consumers where they're already at, and provide that resource and that channel for connection to answer those questions when they come up.
And Emma, last one for you. As someone who straddles both the producer world and growing up in agriculture, and now you're in a professional communications role talking about agriculture, what have you learned working in ag communications, and how has that changed your thoughts, if it has at all, about connecting with consumers or even just representing agriculture more broadly to consumers?
Yeah, when I was taking communications classes in university and then moving into a professional role, communications or any kind of communication was described to me as a gift, and not in the sense that I have something that's so valuable that everyone needs to hear, more as, what do I need to think about that audience needs to hear from me? What can I do to serve them? And so for me, thinking about communications as a service really led me to shift my focus to my audience. So thinking less about what do I as a farmer want to tell the world, and thinking more about what does the public want to hear from me? What are those questions that they're actually asking that they actually want to hear? Most of the time, like I said, it's not about every detail, every nuance of what we're doing. It's those really basic questions, and they just want to know the human behind their food.
Those are kind of trick questions sometimes when I ask them, because usually everybody's, oh, that's really hard. It was a lot harder to communicate or build my brand than I thought it was. And I was like, no, yeah, it is a tough job. Okay, we're going to wrap up a few more questions here, and I want to leave some time at the end here for audience Q&A. So we'll get through 2 or 3 more questions just as a group, and then we'll move into that. So what are some of your favorite stories that you share, whether they're personal stories or stories about your operation when you're having a conversation with a consumer? Emma, I'll start with you.
Yeah, similar to Big Marble, my favorite message or story to tell consumers is why I farm. And for me, the story that usually comes up is when I was about 6 years old and I was finally old enough to go check cows with my dad at 6 a.m. That's all I wanted to do. And that really resonates with people because even if it's not farming or going to check cows, everybody has something that gets them out of bed in the morning. Everybody can feel that human connection, that passion. And so that story to me just always hits home because it's connecting on a human level and not so much about facts.
Matt, how about for you?
I like to tell people that craft beer is going to save the world. And then people always pressure me to elaborate on that. I don't want to, but so craft beer uses more barley to make the same amount of beer, and barley is an important rotation crop in Alberta and in Canada, and it helps lengthen our crop rotations. And then we're producing the beer where people are going to be drinking it. So there's just so many benefits to craft beer that I can confidently say that drinking craft beer is going to save the world.
Okay. I like it. Charlotte, how about for you?
For me, one of my favorite stories, and I want everyone to have this experience, is my dad got into cattle. He was first generation because his parents didn't farm, but both sides of his grandparents did. And he had a fairly substantial herd of 500 head. And then we had the drought and then BSC in the early 2000s. My brothers and I were not really old enough to kind of grasp the importance and the dire situation that everything was in at that point. But we didn't have cattle for a number of years until my dad felt ready to get back into them. And there was one morning that we woke up and there were cattle out on our pasture, and we were just so excited because we thought our dad had gone out and purchased some, but it was the neighbors. They had broken into our pastures. But then once we stopped off at our local auction mart and we bought 7 heifers. I can't remember if they were bred or not at the time, but anyway, the next year they calved, and a little while after we took one of those calves who, of course, when you're all young, you name everything, and so we had named him Cinnamon. And so we butchered Cinnamon, and we sat down and we ate Cinnamon, and we said, man, Cinnamon's really tasty. And so I want everyone to be able to have those moments and maybe not necessarily know exactly the name of that animal, but at least know the name of the farmer who produced that animal. And it's been echoed a lot here from all of the presenters. A lot of farmers don't get that gratification of knowing that someone that they know or seeing their brand in a store on a shelf, they don't get to see that. And that's really heartbreaking, I think, because we do so much, we put so much love and effort and time and sacrifice into that. So being able to raise whatever that is, and then we just say goodbye to it and never see that end enjoyment again is really sad. So being able to know that we have customers who take photos and post what they are cooking and making with what we raise is just so special, and it just gives you that excitement. And I want everyone to be able to have that in terms of the farmer, but also the customer knowing, I might not know that the animal's name is Cinnamon, but I know who raised it.
Okay, last question for me, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience and leave lots of time for audience Q&A because we got a great group up here. I'm sure they got lots of questions for you. So looking into the future, what gives you the most optimism about telling agriculture's story or building that connection between producers and consumers or just building trust with the everyday consumer? You can go the pessimistic route too if you think there's some roadblocks and challenges there, but I want to end on a high note, so we'll stick with the optimism. Emma, if you want to start?
Yeah, I'd go back to the fact that there is such a high level of support from consumers for producers. To me, when consumers are willing to kind of stick their neck out and stand up for producers on an issue like front of pack labeling that I talked about, or that time and time again we see that farmers and ranchers are the most trusted, or when we do consumer research at work and we see that there's a strong majority of Canadians that have positive sentiments about beef cattle, farmers and ranchers, about the beef industry, what's not to be optimistic about? It's not a battle that we're fighting, it's continuing to support something that's already really strong. So that to me is a really optimistic outlook.
Matt, how about for you?
Yeah, it's getting easier and easier to tell the story. It's you have direct access to the consumers, and so it was probably 5 or 6 years ago now. We were involved in the first beer in North America that used blockchain to trace the ingredients. And so consumers could scan a QR code and see that it grew on Hamill farms, and this is the crop inputs that were put onto it. This is where it was malted, this is when it was brewed, this is when it was scanned. So it's the information's there for the consumer. The consumers that want to know more about their food can know more about their food.
Charlotte?
I think now when people say they're a farmer and they say that to someone who's not a farmer, that person is just so excited and they want to learn more. Whereas probably when my great-grandparents, because my grandparents didn't exactly farm themselves, but they grew up there, people probably looked down on them. And so being a farmer wasn't cool. And now being a farmer is really cool, and we want to keep that going. And I think it'll just keep growing with the farmers who are just ready to take that extra step and share what they're doing online. And I think the only challenge that we have is really our own internal challenge, that maybe being a little afraid or nervous to pick up the phone and record what we're doing, or finding the time. So it does take a community to do it, because when I post, it's not only me. I can't be at the butcher and checking cattle and here at the same time. So in our group chat, I always just send, it's probably my most requested thing, pictures please. And so hopefully my brothers and my mom, my dad doesn't have a phone, so he just sends me good vibes, I guess. But doing things like that, working with your family to be able to make it a little easier, because it's a lot of work.
Yeah. Okay. We have about 15 minutes left for any audience questions, so I will hand it over to the audience or anybody online that has questions. Mike down here in the front. All of our mic runners just ran to the top of the stairs. Oh, is there?
Thank you so
Sorry.
much for that awesome presentation. So many great points there. I'm kind of curious, going back to the assets and the resources that you're getting from different partners. In your days, you're obviously doing all the work on the farm, doing activities with your family and friends, and a lot of other things. How do you make the time and headspace to tell your stories?
Anybody can feel free to jump in on that one if you have one right away, but Matt?
Well, I don't think we can make time. It's if there was a way, I would certainly create more of it. So it's something that you do have to carve out. You have to take the time to dedicate to that.
I think one thing I'd say on that is taking a look at what you think is post-worthy. Again, consumers are interested in really simple things. You might not think that taking a video while you're feeding cattle in the morning is that post-worthy, but to them that's gold. And so just taking those slices out of what you're already doing in a day can really help with that. Now, I understand I'm not the type of person that loves pulling my phone out when we're sorting cattle. I think I'd get yelled at by a family member. But, if you can have that conversation and say, hey, can we take 2 minutes to do this really quick? It's something we're already doing. Chances are you can make that happen.
I like the yelling part because I think that's just it's an honest consideration that especially if you're working cattle or any animal, it's going to be a thing. But really, the more you do it, the more it becomes second nature. And so even my brothers who are busy taking videos is kind of the last thing on their mind. They'll set their phone down and they'll get some really nice 15-minute videos for me, and then I have to deal with this massive file. But they're still doing it, and they realize that it's something that is important and that I'm probably going to ask them to do. So it gets to be a little bit more of a regular thing. I liked when you said carving out time to do things with your family. This is the first time in 4 years my fiance and I have actually left the farm together. So other than that, I just post all the time. So maybe if I posted less, we could get away more. But the posting is not super hard, especially for a lot of younger people who are on their phone quite a bit. So it's easier to kind of snap. And when you have a lot of people who are kind of used to your farm, they get the sense of what's going on.
Yeah, I think, it can be like anything. Sometimes it's hard to get started, but hopefully you guys get some enjoyment out of it too, and it becomes a little bit easier and feels like a little bit less of a chore. And when you do have those great moments of building a connection with the consumer and things like that, it makes you push to find the time to do it in your days. So we did have a question down here. Got one in the middle.
Thanks, Nevin Rosawson with Alberta Pulse Growers. My question to you is, how do you approach addressing the difficult questions you get from consumers? So in your case, Matt, perhaps herbicides or pesticides with barley production, or say the use of, in beef with injections for hormones, etc. How do you approach bridging that gap and addressing misinformation with consumers?
Yeah, I can start on that one. I think number one, like I said before, is shifting that mindset of why the person's asking. So they're not asking to challenge you, to attack you. They have a valid concern. And so, trying to focus on trust and connection rather than just throwing back with facts is kind of my number one tip there. The second thing I'd say is, I think Charlotte hit the nail on the head with comparing it to things that people can relate to. So dogs and cats, they can understand. Does their dog get vaccines? Probably. Makes sense for our cattle to do it as well. So a lot of those things that help put it in perspective for something that they can understand is valuable. And the last thing I'd say is, in the wise words of Kenny Rogers, know when to walk away, know when to... So, sometimes you're not going to change a person's mind. And I think we all have that gut instinct of when a conversation is valuable versus not. So know when to say, yeah, it's okay to disagree. And then also know that if you don't know the answer to a question, it's also okay to say, hey, I'm going to look more into that and follow up with you, or I'm going to direct you to somewhere else.
Matt, did you want to jump in on that one too?
That was really great. Not much to add, but yeah, just with honesty and kind of explaining, hey, this is why we do this. This is what we're doing now. This is where we're trying to get to. This is what we've tried. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I think that curiosity factor too that you spoke to, Emma, too, to get a better understanding of why they're asking those questions, just so you can understand the information that they're kind of armed with, and then you know what direction to go with, as opposed to, I know it can often be our instinct just to start throwing facts at people, but getting to know them a little bit better and getting to know why they have these questions and then kind of working up from there is really great advice. I think we did have one there in the middle.
Yeah. So actually, my question is a perfect follow-up for what was just asked. So the example of, say, hormones in beef versus no hormones, or organic versus conventional. This question was more from the consumer's perspective, but what are your thoughts when you see actual producers, promoting one versus the other, and kind of the way that consumers feel as a result of seeing those differing opinions or production systems?
Arguing with other producers about
This
the way
is a huge thing online right now, and it's not just seeing it from maybe the consumer side, but it's actually other producers calling out other producers who are kind of bashing one another's methods or methodologies. And I can kind of understand both sides of the coin, but it does come down to, is the food safe? Is it sustainable? Is it consistent? Is it available? And for a lot of people in the world, they're struggling with hunger. And so we can have those conversations, but then there are other people in the world who don't have easy access to food. So I think the point in that is just getting to producers just to understand that, okay, maybe you do grass-fed, maybe I add a little bit of grain in there, maybe you vaccinate, maybe you don't. But at the end of the day, we're producing something safe. And so it's best to not have arguments between one another, because that just causes issues and that takes away that public trust.
Yeah, to add on to that, I'd say, a person eating, I'm going to use beef because that's obviously the space I work in. A person eating any type of beef is better than a person eating no beef. So to me, it's better that we use that rising tide to raise all ships. It's important that we aren't arguing amongst ourselves as producers. We can have different opinions on what the best way to do things is, but we're here to secure public trust in all beef or all barley or all lamb, whatever that looks like. And so however we can do that is only going to support our efforts regardless of what production system we use.
Yeah, it can get tricky. I know, like with the Gemstone guys, we can't all agree on what to call a cut of beef sometimes, and now we can't all agree on the term we use to raise it, and just all the terminology, which I think can be great sometimes, can get a little bit confusing even for people in the industry. So for people outside the industry too, it can become a bit of a sticking point. Any other questions from the audience? Oh, Kim.
First off, congratulations and thank you for your wonderful comments. This is a great panel. We have a new Minister of Agriculture. He's going to be here this week. What message would you give to him to take back to his colleagues sitting around the table on how are we going to elevate the presence of our industry?
A big question, but a good one.
I can take a stab at that one, yeah. I think what I'd say is that not everyone thinks about agriculture, like I've said in detail, but food is something that matters to everybody. So the more that we can elevate food is important, and food is important to people. Prices are something that people are talking about more than ever. So the more that we can connect food to agriculture, the more people will care about agriculture.
Good question, Kim. My answer is super specific, probably more specific than you want. But my message to the Minister of Agriculture is Alberta grows half the barley in Canada, 1/3 of the barley in North America. Malt barley breeding needs to stay in Alberta. It's at risk right now, so it'd be tragic to lose that program. That program needs to stay in Alberta. Malt barley breeding in Alberta.
I'm also going to be really specific. Yes to interprovincial trade. Full stop.
All right.
Yeah.
Great. Well, if we don't have any more questions from the audience, I think that's a great one to wrap on. So thank you again to all three of you for joining us. I know, and coming off farm, and so I don't. Maybe this was a bit of a blessing and gave you a bit of an excuse to get off the farm, Charlotte, for a few days.
It rained on our
and
hay, so we had nothing better to do.
So I appreciate your time and sharing your insights with us today, and I think the three of you will be sticking around for a little bit at the Stampede Party, so if anybody wants to have a follow-up conversation with any of our panelists, we'll be sticking around for a bit. So